Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum. We're here tonight to discuss with you Malcom X, his autobiography, the autobiography of Malcom X. Tonight we're discussing on behalf of Islamic Circle North America. This is done as one of the programs of Islamic Circle North America. Tonight we're discussing chapter 14, which is action-packed, full of wonderful, exciting, dramatic information. Chapter 14. Chapter 14, the setting of chapter 14 is in the late 1950s, the early 60s. During this time, Elijah Muhammad, as well as Malcom X, become very well aware and acute of the value of the print media. So they start producing small articles, columns for newspapers. Malcom was doing one for the LA Herald, and Elijah Muhammad is doing one for the Amsterdam News. Malcom was there to start a newspaper for Nation of Islam. In 1957, he's dispatched by Elijah Muhammad. He's sent to Los Angeles to help organize the Nation of Islam in Los Angeles. While he's there in LA, he developed a relationship with this black newspaper, the LA Dispatch, LA Herald, excuse me. And he gets a chance to observe the operation. He's a quick learner. Malcolm's very smart, very intelligent. He's a quick learner. He observed the operation. Then when he comes back to New York, he buys a camera, get a print machine, he starts writing. Guess what? Everything is history. He starts the newspaper from the Nation of Islam. And he names it the Muhammad Speaks, named after Elijah Muhammad. Right. This newspaper becomes the iconic newspaper for the Black Power movement of the 60s and the Black consciousness of the 60s. This newspaper, in the 60s, is produced by Malcom X, named by Malcom X. Malcom says that later on, some years later, that because of jealousy, his name wouldn't be mentioned in this newspaper. But this newspaper is still around today. The name has changed. Now it's called Muslim Journal. It was Muhammad Speaks, the Melody News. Now it's called Muslim Journal. It is one of the oldest Muslim journals or newspaper that exists in the country. The Muslim Journal, headed by Sister Aisha Mustafa, selling 1 million copies a week. A million a month would have been good, or a year. It was doing 1 million a week. When you're doing that many papers, when you sell that many papers, you dominate the press. When you can dominate any media outlet, print media or whatever it is, you have a good chance of building consensus. So it dominated the print media in the Black community, the Muhammad Speaks. During the same time, Malcom was approached by a well-known Black journalist named Lomax. Lomax approached Malcom. I can't think of his first name. Lewis Lomax. He approached Malcom. He tells Malcom that Mike Wallace would like to produce a documentary on the Nation of Islam. So Malcom takes his Elijah Muhammad gives his consent. All of a sudden you have these film crews, these video crews, camera crews follow Malcom around, recording his speeches, recording the speeches done by Elijah Muhammad, recording activities of the Nation of Islam members and some of the businesses and schools and so forth. During this time, the Nation of Islam began to get a lot of media attention. The Look magazine, very well-known magazine back in the 50s and 60s, Look, Life, Reader's Digest, Newsweek, all these news outlets and magazines started producing content about the Nation of Islam. So the Nation of Islam was getting a lot of attention then, back in these days. Things get very hectic for Malcom. Very hectic for Malcom. Malcom says that he has a lot of reporters calling him, asking questions. He said he spends up to 5-6 hours a day with a telephone receiver up to his ear, debating and talking and answering questions with reporters. You know? Meanwhile, in the late 1950s, the center was seized by Elijah Muhammad, the two African countries and some Middle Eastern countries. He comes back and says that there's a lot of support for Nation Islam in those countries. There's some people, some of the leaders are sort of proud of their support, but in general, there's a lot of support for the awakening, the programs of Elijah Muhammad, Nation Islam, with their attempt to awaken Black people in America. The documentary produced by Mike Wallace comes out. It's called The Hate That Hate Produces. The Hate That Hate Produces. And during this time, there was a lot of media attention surrounding Nation Islam. So as I said, Malcolm's getting a lot of calls from different reporters, and he's spending hours, 5-6 hours on the phone, answering questions, debating reporters and stuff like that, you know. He asked a lot of questions about why this organization, Nation Islam, which was shocking a lot of people, was teaching hate and was not in favor of integration. They were called a hate group. You know, it was teaching hate. You know, it was doing the same thing the white racists was doing. So they said. So Malcolm had some very good answers. Why are y'all teaching hate? Why are you teaching Black people to hate white people? Malcolm has some good answers. He says that for the white man to ask why the Black man hates the white man is like, he says, it's like get this, he said, the rapist asking the raped, why do you hate me? Or a wolf asking a sheep, why do you hate me? He said the white man had no moral authority to condemn or criticize anybody for hate. You know? So all this attention, all these things are going on. It's a very hectic time for Nation Islam, hectic time for Malcolm. Malcolm is really into this. He's excited, really into this. Elijah Muhammad, on the other hand, has a different demeanor. He's a little different. He's a little calmer. You know, Malcolm said he's a little calmer. He wasn't as excited as he was. Malcolm approached all this, even his teachings, his program, was a little different. When Malcolm first got out of prison back in 1952, Elijah Muhammad told Malcolm, he said, look, he said, all you have to do is just teach what we believe. You don't have to criticize anyone. It's like having 2 glasses of water, a dirty glass of water, and a clean glass of water. He said people naturally going to choose the clean, clear glass of water or the dirty glass of water. You got to condemn the dirty glass of water. They'll naturally clean and choose the clean glass of water. Malcolm said he had more fight in him. Malcolm said that he see a dirty glass of water, he's going to condemn it, call it dirty. He had a different demeanor, different attitude, you know. So during this whole glamour, all this media attention that the Nation of Islam is getting, it elevates the Nation of Islam in the eyes of the people. It helps to get and promote the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and teaching the Nation of Islam. So it spreads around the country because of this media attention. They've been criticized, they've been called a hate group and stuff like that, but the message of Elijah Muhammad is getting out because it elevates them. Here domestically in this country and international basis as well. So all this media attention, it leads to Malcolm doing different interviews on radio talk shows and television, and not just interviews, been part of panel discussions and debate groups. He's debating white people, Black people, and so forth, you know, people who want to debate him. And why was he a separatist? Why did he teach what they call hate and so forth, you know? And it wasn't the separatism, they was preaching the same as segregation. Malcolm said he would go to these interviews and he would see that he'd see these Black integrationists who's in favor of integrating with these white liberals, and they would act like they're friends and talk to them on first name basis and so forth. Malcolm said it was all a lie. There was no true integration in America, especially in the 1950s and 60s. It was all a lie, you know. So when they would introduce Malcolm on these shows, they would say he was this angry, fiery preacher from New York. Malcolm would tell them, no, he would stop and say, I'm the representative like Muhammad, who's the leader of the Muslim community in America. You know? So they would get elevated by all this media attention, which led to another elevation, Malcolm getting invited to be part of these TV shows and these radio shows and going to college campuses and universities, debating professors and all these things. He was very sharp. People saw how sharp he was, how smart he was. So it elevated Nation Islam, the media attention did, elevated Nation Islam and elevated Malcolm as well. Yeah. And this elevation, the second elevation, led to a third elevation. All this media attention they were getting. It led to them having these public rallies for anyone to come to in these cities across the country, these major cities. The Nation Islam had these public rallies, and they would invite all these people there. And you had overflowing crowds of Black people coming, massive crowds. They would rent these convention centers and these big city halls and convention centers in different cities, and they would maxed out, overflowing crowds would be there. There'd be so many people coming that all of them couldn't get in, And these big convention centers, and they wouldn't allow any whites in, no white reporters, or no any whites at first, and later on they allow white, and then later they have a small section for white people to come in. But in general, at the very beginning, there was no whites allowed to attend. And when you went to these rallies, just like when you went to the temples of Nation Islam, you went to these temples, you would get searched. Everybody would get patted down. Going to the temples, going to the rally, everybody gets patted down. You have a large number of people coming in, everybody get patted down. During the late 1950s, Malcolm went to overseas for overseas. Elijah Muhammad in 1961 went overseas as well. And when he came back, he changed the name of the temples to the mosques. He started calling these places mosques then. But at these massive rallies, most of the people coming, the overwhelming majority of people who was coming were not members of Nation Islam. These were just Black people in general. If you remember when Malcolm first got out of prison in 1952, he lived in Detroit, they would go to Chicago hear Elijah Muhammad's talk. And they would have only 10 cars going to Chicago. And roughly only 200 people there to hear him talk. Fast forward that, 7, 8 years later, they were having these big public rallies. They went from having 200 people talking and 10 cars coming to 200 to 300 buses of people coming from all over the country. People driving from all over the country. People flying in from all over the country. And Elijah Muhammad had a private jet, his own private jet. They went from 10 cars to 200 or 300 buses, and people come from all over the place. And Elijah Muhammad flying in on a private jet. So there's a lot of growth as a result of this media attention that Malcolm was getting, the media attention that Nation Islam was getting back in the late 1950s and early 1960s. So at these big public rallies, to be electrified. I've seen it, I've been there, electrified, a sea of Black people. Like I said, overwhelming majority of people coming to these rallies was just regular Black Christians. They were not members of Nation Islam. But it led to a lot of them becoming Muslims. Malcolm talks about in this chapter how a lot of people became Muslim there. Pastors, Seventh-day Adventist pastors, reverends, entertainers. You had Louis Farrakhan was an entertainer. You had members of the Phonics, Kool and the Gang, Joe Tex. You had politicians. You had a lot of people becoming Muslim then, in the heyday of the Nation Islam. A lot of them becoming Muslim, These big rallies, Elijah Muhammad come in. Before Elijah Muhammad come in, Malcolm would do a talk, and a few other people do a talk, just to get the crowd ready and motivate for Elijah Muhammad. So Elijah Muhammad would come in, and people would just be mesmerized by Elijah Muhammad. He'd come in surrounded by the quasi-military unit of the Nation Islam. He'd come in surrounded by them. He'd go up on stage, and people would just be mesmerized by his presence. I remember this. People just mesmerized. He wasn't he was a sluggish speaker. He wasn't really eloquent, but his words and just his presence, he had this aura about him, and people just loved him, He would get up there and start talking, and they would say, "Teach us, messenger, astaghfirullah. Teach us, little lamb, Teachers, that's right, that's right. You know, they were so into and electrified by what he was saying. I remember those days. And he would get up there and say, you are the original man. You're the cream of the planet Earth. You're the original man. All races come from you, you know. He said you can have two black people, black man, jet black woman. They could produce a white man, a person who appeared to be white, albino, with light skin, white looking skin and blue eyes. But he said, this is proof that you're original man. He said, you can't get two white people to produce a black person. But black people can produce someone who appeared to be white, albino. But he said, that was proof that you're the original man. You're the master of the planet Earth. You know, you're the Asiatic black man. He taught that one time Africa and Asia was one continent. It was called Asia. That these small black people actually was master and ruled this land. You know, you're the Asiatic black man. You're the tribe of Shabazz. You know, they named a lot of businesses Shabazz, and people wonder where does the word Shabazz come from. You know, Shabazz is not really an Arabic word. And writers a few years ago found out there's a tiny village or settlement in Pakistan with that name Shabazz. And they said because of that, it was that Farad Muhammad, who taught Elijah Muhammad, was from Pakistan. You know, but anyway, you're the so-called Negro. You know, African Americans gone from colored to Negro. You know, they preferred Negro at the time. You know, up to the 1950s. Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm changed that. They changed that from Negro to black. They allowed and provided that pathway. You know, Elijah Muhammad condemned that word. He said it was derogatory. You look it up, you know, word origin dictionary, you see it comes from necromancy. Necromancy means something dead. You know? So he condemned it. He said, you so-called Negro. He said, you're the black man, Asiatic black man. Yeah. You're the supreme, you're the God. You are God, astaghfirullah. That's idolatry, pure idolatry. Just make that clear. He was wrong in doing this. That's wrong. He said, the white man, he's your enemy, he's the blue-eyed devil. That's wrong. We're talking about this book, though, and what was taught then. You know. That was pure idolatry to say the black man. And the one with the most wisdom among you, Farad Muhammad, is God supreme. Astaghfirullah. That's wrong. That's stupid. That's absolutely wrong. But it was wrong, but it was effective though. It was effective during those times. A lot of people gravitated to his message and it appealed to a lot of black people, although it was wrong. I was attracted to it. And we knew it was wrong, but we was attracted to it. Yeah. After a very time, we accepted it. Okay, the black man is God. Stuff long, crazy stuff like that. You know. But what we saw in Islam was unity, bold unity. So he taught that the black man is God, the white man is the devil. We got forgive us for things like that, but thinking stuff like that. That was absolutely wrong, but effective. Why was it effective? It was effective because of the climate that this society and world was in then. You know, a climate, and it still is in a certain extent, of white supremacy. White supremacy is a racial hierarchy. This result of a relentless campaign over centuries and centuries and centuries. The racial hierarchy, the white people have everything, get everything, and be on top. It's a racial hierarchy. And in this white supremacy, it degrades the faculties of human beings. Okay? To the point that you think white people are all good and black people are all wrong. I mentioned the Dahl test before. It was done in 1949 with Dr. Clark, and repeated a couple times since then. Almost the same result, where you have these three black children, ages 3 and 4, and you got these two dolls, white doll and black doll. Ask these black children, choose the doll that's good. The doll is beautiful, the doll is nice, the doll is smart. Each time they choose this white doll, all these positive things. Choose a doll that's ugly, the doll that's dumb, the doll that's bad, the doll you don't like. Each time these black children choose the black doll. That's white supremacy. What that shows that, and this is what Elijah Muhammad was trying to get to, History of the life of Muhammad provide an antidote to white supremacy. Because that shows that and this first time this test was done in 1949, that a person, even children, can embody the ideals, the views of white supremacy, and at the same time be against racism, but the actions support the very thing you say you're against. That still exists today. Amy Cooper, the white lady who was a liberal in New York City, called the police on this black bird watcher, a liberal, but she embodied the ideals of white supremacy. But her actions, she abhorred racism. She considers her racist, but her actions supported the very thing she said she was against. White supremacy degrades your faculty. So what Elijah Muhammad was doing, what he was teaching was absolutely ridiculous and wrong, but it was effective because he was providing an antidote. People want an antidote. And when he provided an antidote to white supremacy, instead of saying whites has been good, positive, nice, and smart and beautiful, he was flipping the script. Instead of saying blacks have been bad and on the lower end, he flipped the script and said, okay, the blacks are the righteous, the good, the positive, and the white man is the evil, the bad, so forth. It's an antidote. And it worked to a certain extent because the Nation of Islam grew immensely during this heyday in the 60s and the early 70s. It grew. It got to the point that where the Nation Islam owned banks, owned office buildings, schools, farmland in several states, all kinds of businesses. It grew. It grew. It grew all over the country. So it worked to a certain extent, you think. But that was the teaching of Elijah Muhammad. And Malcolm talks in this chapter, he talks about the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, something he would say at these different public rallies. Well, Elijah Muhammad began to get ill. He had bronchial asthmatic condition. His doctor wanted him to live in a dry climate, so he moved to Phoenix, Arizona, because the air was dry down there. So he had to pull back from these public events, these public rallies. He started just doing administrative stuff. Malcolm would fly down a lot to consult him. But he told Malcolm, I want you to be up front. You become the front person. And Malcolm became the most popular person for the Nation of Islam. He said this, he said that the more popular you become, the better they know me. But he warned Malcolm. He said that with popularity comes hate. That, that something goes along with popularity. And Malcolm said he found that to be true. So another thing that Malcolm, I think interesting, Malcolm talks about in this chapter, he talks about the rehabilitation of junkies and drug addicts. Nation of Islam was known, but I've seen this myself. But Malcolm details in this chapter how successful the Nation of Islam was rehabilitating people who was on drugs, prostitutes, criminals, people who've been in prison. At first, initially when the Nation of Islam was set up, a lot of people come to the Nation of Islam were people ex-convicts and very poor people and people on drugs, But during the heyday, especially in the late 60s and early 70s, when I came in, it had changed altogether. A lot of people coming to Nation of Islam then were had not been ex-con, been in prison, not on drugs, stuff like that. In my neighborhood, guys I grew up with, in childhood, all of us came into the Nation of Islam. None of us had been in the prison. A lot of us had went to college, got degrees and so forth. So it changed, during that time, But Malcolm, he details the successful drug rehabilitation program that the Nation of Islam had. It was very attractive there, very attractive, very strong. Also, something I think that's interesting he talks about in this book, he talks about how the Nation of Islam was infiltrated by undercover agents working for the FBI, working for different police departments. All right. He talks about how people who had surrounded Elijah Muhammad, his inner circle, a lot of them were informants. They were undercover working for the FBI and for the different police department. it's been reported that the infamous National Secretary of the Nation of Islam for many, many decades, John Ali, that John Ali really was working for the FBI. He was an undercover FBI informant. And a lot of the Elijah Inner Circle, as well as a lot of Malcom Inner Circle people really working for the FBI and New York Police Department. And they instigated tension, fermented tension between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm, to divide them and get them hating each other. In fact, just a few weeks ago, this man died in New York City. He had been part of Malcolm's Inner Circle in New York City. He wrote a letter and had sealed it up and asked the family not to read this letter after his death. So national news a few weeks ago, one of his family members read this letter. He said that he was part of Malcom X Inner Circle, but he was really an undercover agent for the New York Police Department. He said in his letter that the New York Police Department, in collaboration with the FBI, was responsible for Malcolm X assassination. Something we knew anyway to begin with. They was behind this. So they was infiltrated by informants. And a lot of informants would come and even admit it, because they would be so enticed and they found Nation Islam so appealing that they would admit that they were sent there just to be agents to spy on the Nation Islam for the FBI and for the police department. But then they would convert to the Nation Islam. So a lot of this happened. So this is a very interesting chapter. Towards the end of this chapter, I think some good points are made. The Nation Islam that was touted, do for self, not to rely on anybody else, to do for yourself. Elijah Muhammad, at the same time Elijah Muhammad was touting this, his children, he had 9 children with Clara, they all worked odd jobs, worked for other people. So Malcolm devised a way for them to work for the Nation Islam. Some of them became heads of the school system that was started by Nation Islam, or the trucking industry. They had a trucking industry. Some of them was over the bank. They had a bank there in Chicago. The Fruit of Islam, FOI. Some of them became captains, supreme captain, assistant supreme captain, and captain of MGT. FOI was the men, quasi-men group, and the MGT was the women group. So it was headed by Elijah Muhammad family members. They had cleaners there. They had this huge Muhammad Speaks printing plant there in Chicago, and they would run that plant. So they found different positions, different jobs for them. So it's a very interesting chapter with a lot of information. I'm sure I will look at some things, but we're going to conclude with that. We're going to have a little discussion, those that's on Zoom with us. So we'll conclude with Surah Al-Asr. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان في خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر صدق الله العظيم.